Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, the clean approach to building your successful business. Now, let's introduce Tom Borg and Dr. Dave Miles. Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, as we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And when we mean clean, we're not talking about spick and span and dust mops. This podcast is all about the acronym CLEAN. We're all about communication, leadership, engagement.
And no drama.
So today we're continuing in our series on the 3 I's of EQ: identify, illustrate, and implement. So what we're looking at is we're looking at part 4, where we're talking about social awareness. Now, in the first part, we talked about the 5 different parts of the EQ assessment that we utilize. It's based on Daniel Goleman's model. We talk about self-awareness and self-regulation, which follow right along with his book on social awareness on emotional intelligence and working with emotional intelligence. Now, saying that, there's one aspect of the assessment that we use that's a little bit different than Dr. Goleman, and that is it looks at internal motivation, intrinsic motivation. We talked about that last time. They're building blocks in each other. You have to have a good level of self-awareness to be able to be aware and be self-regulatory. Can't fix something if you don't know it's a problem. That self-awareness and regulation helps maintain a high level of internal motivation. And then motivation is really the key to look at social awareness and social regulation, which will be our next 2 episodes. So today we're talking about social awareness. And one of the things that from more of a before I get into a formal definition, so to speak, of social awareness, I really want to step back and look at, as we go from the self part to the others part of emotional intelligence. And this is the part that Daniel Goleman talks about, empathy. He calls it empathy. We use it on this assessment tool, call it, social awareness. And so that's, if we use the terms interchangeably, you'll know what we're talking about. But with social awareness, making that leap from being self to others, I really wanted to hit on what EQ really does and what it is. If you look at it, I mean, obviously it's a kind of a foundational quality. It's extraordinarily important. Research finds in upper level managers and executives, and not just executives, but high performers. 90% of the difference between the people with same skills, but one's a high performer, one's not, ends up being emotional intelligence. But this really struck me when I looked at it, Tom, and it really looked at that EQ looks at a person's, obviously it's emotional intelligence, but it's the ability to sense, to understand, and to effectively apply the power and acumen of emotions to facilitate higher levels of collaboration and productivity. So when you look at people are like, okay, emotional intelligence, gee whiz, so what? Who cares? That's the gee whiz, so what? Who cares? The higher levels of EQ lead to that higher level of collaboration, higher level of productivity, and that produces bottom line results in an organization. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And Dave, when it comes down to, we're talking about empathy. How well does that person read other people and sense where they're at? And can you meet them where they're at? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about here today when it comes to social awareness. But the key is you have to understand yourself first. That's why we covered the first 3 parts. And now we're getting into something that is going to really make a difference for our leaders, because you're going to be able to relate to their people better. And as a result, improve that type of a business relationship with their team.
Yes. And as we go through this, I would challenge the listeners to think of some examples in their workplace and their work experience where you're like, oh, yeah, that would have been helpful. Ties this back to something that they've done. So as we've talked about a formal definition, so to speak, and what we mean by social awareness, just to put it into a contextual framework, just the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and your actions affect others, which is very important because you want to be aware of your own emotions, be able to regulate those. And then now I'm kind of, well, how does what I say and what I do affect others? But really, when you look about social awareness, the big thing with that is, I look at it as that's just your ability to read the room. That's your ability to kind of take, for lack of a better term, a room temperature. whether it's one person, you and them, or it's a whole crowded room full of people at a networking event or at
That's
a
right.
conference or at a at a manager's meeting.
That's right, Dave. That could take a lot of different forms. But for instance, if you're in a manager's meeting and you got your team in there, and you start the meeting, you look around, you can see people's faces, you can read their body language. But I always like to suggest my clients is when you start a meeting, start out with some questions, find out where people are at. This is going to give you some time to just see and feel where people are, and at the same time helps them to feel like they're more in the meeting because they may be carrying with them whatever crisis they were trying to deal with before they stepped into that meeting or on that Zoom call with you. So this gives you some time to read where they're at, and at the same time helps them to get into the present moment with you. But that's a good way of just being more aware of what's going on in that room at the time.
Yeah, because I mean, when you get a feel for what's going on in the room, you take kind of that room temperature. I mean, that feeling is going to have a big effect on the productivity of the people in the room because
Sure.
it how you read that depends on how you're going to act or react. And matter of fact, before we even started the recording, you were talking about an example of a manager that was coming in late. And that I thought was really helpful. So give the listeners tell me about that example again. That was
Sure.
really good.
So there was a company I was doing some work with, and the business owner, he was, you might say, a high D, and he did not tolerate people coming late to any meetings. Well, he had one of his managers who had been late once or twice before. They were waiting for him. Now the meeting was being delayed, so he just went ahead and started the meeting, and we knew that the owner was upset, and this was bothering him. Well, sure enough, the manager shows up, comes in the room, and he just let him have it. Now, did that have a powerful boosting effect for the rest of the team? No. Everybody sat there frozen, very tense. And what may have been a better approach at that time for that decision maker is to say, listen, I'm a little concerned about someone being late here. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and we'll start this meeting again. That might have been the best way to handle it because frankly, at that point, it wasn't going to be a real productive meeting.
No. Well, if everybody's sitting there waiting like, Joe's not here. Hey, the boss is ticked. Hey, the boss is going to drop the hammer on him when he comes in. I mean, it turns into almost like a WWE wrestling match. I mean, at some point, you're like, man, I can't wait for the show, right? As soon as Joe comes in, he's going to drop the hammer on him, and it's going to be ugly. So they're getting out the proverbial popcorn and then juju beans, and they're waiting for the show.
It just wasn't a good situation. And of course, at that point, we knew the owner was upset, and if anyone wanted to ask a question or bring something up, they knew it was going to be something that would be very tenacious because the response from the owner at that point could be still affected by his outburst a few minutes earlier. So I think it's a matter of having some emotional awareness in the sense that you're going to really be able to guide your own feelings, but now that is going to be torn towards your group, which we're talking about here, social awareness. So that's important that we regulate first, but then when we come to that social awareness part, we do what's necessary to make it an effective interaction between your team in this case.
Yeah. Because I mean, it's all about making good decisions, and you don't want to end up, like you said, if it's something important, like I've got to bring this up in this meeting, well, maybe this just isn't a good time. Maybe your own emotional intelligence is one of the managers like, the boss is ticked and this is not the time to bring this up because I know I'm going to get it shot down. So nobody's able to make a really good decision because of his emotions. And so good on the managers being able to read that, like, all right, let me just sit here and be cool because this is not the time to bring up anything. But it doesn't help the company. It doesn't lead to the collaboration and the productivity that we were talking about before.
Nor the trust building. Hard to build trust. You're not sure how the person's going to react when you say something to them. So
no, that is very true. I mean, they talk about that. Research shows that leaders with a high level of EQ, they know that social awareness creates about 90% of the impact through two things: listening and engagement.
That's right.
So, like, even if there's no definitive outcome, you don't have what are our next steps, our next action items reached, and you don't, check the box, like you said, for the high D. Just most of that comes through, I'm listening and I'm engaging. And like I said, that gives you that ability to better read the room, one person versus a whole room full. And if you remember a couple of episodes ago, we talked about the emotional impact of negative experiences. And that if you really triggered and you have a significant negative experience,
Oh, yeah.
you can be out of commission as far as being your most productive for up to 4 hours.
4 hours.
And so two negative experiences, half a day. So two of them in a day, you got somebody cuts you off on the way to work, and then somebody gives you, you have a negative interaction with a coworker or a boss or a subordinate, sometime midday. I mean, your productivity is shot for the most of the day. But I was looking for the research for this episode, and they were talking about that research shows it takes roughly 5 positive experiences to dilute 1 negative.
Absolutely.
And
so think about this, Dave, and if we multiply that, you've got 5 people in the room that you're leading, and there's a bad experience that takes place in that room, all 5 of those other people are going to be affected.
Yes, for at least a little bit of time each, couple hours, even if not the whole 4.
Right.
So what does that do for your productivity?
Down it goes.
Exactly, because unfortunately now you have a multiplier effect.
Exactly. Good point.
So I'm wondering how much productivity they were able to do after that meeting when everybody was waiting for the boss man to drop the hammer on Joe.
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. That's a challenge.
Yeah, it's really sad. But we had some questions that we wanted to kind of throw out to some folks that I think were pretty good. Things on how to kind of put this into use and really think about, all right, well, how do I read the room, and just think of some situations that have happened in the past. I am no doubt most of our listeners will say, yes, I've been in a room when this happened or that happened. And even before I get into that, even just something as simple as think of the manager that came in the room late. And I'm sure you've seen this before. You have a manager that comes in the room late. The boss just delivered some bad news. Layoffs, it could be sales report, it could be somebody they know that's passed or sick, whatever bad news. So the whole level of the room is down. So you're running late, you come bebopping in there, and you're happy, Mr. Happy Go, Miss Happy Go Lucky, and you're gonna sunshine and rainbows and lollipops and unicorns, and it's spread happiness time, happy, happy, happy. The problem ends up being that's not what the room is. So you really, it just make yourself look foolish, and it really can cause issues because you didn't adequately read the room, the temperature in the room before you started going one way or the other.
That's right. So what we're talking about, this goes both ways.
Yes.
And the leader as well as his people, we need to make sure that we're aware, socially aware.
Absolutely. So I looked at one of the questions I said that we wanted to pose. I said, all right, if you've ever mentored anybody or you've been mentored or same thing, any supervisor, manager relationship, have you had a time where you either pushed somebody too hard or not hard enough? You know what I mean? And then just think about it. Okay, well, yeah, I should have pushed them a little bit harder. Or, well, I probably was a little too tough on them that time. Just think about it. Going back, what could you have done differently? How could you have handled it differently? That's all. Ponder that for a little bit. That's very helpful.
Okay.
All right. So what else?
Well, here's one. So how about this? Can you think of a time when you had to make a tough decision? How were your people affected by it? Again, if we really think through that process, if we have to make a tough decision, yes, not only are you going to be affected by making that decision yourself, but all of your people on your team. So were you upfront, open and honest right from the get-go with them? Again, that's going to build trust. That's going to build an open honesty and a dialogue. So these are just some thoughts for the people listening here today to consider when it comes to building that muscle of social awareness when you're dealing with your team. What's another?
Well, and I was thinking even on that one that you mentioned, how many times have you been a tough time in business and you find out later that it was worse than what you thought, or you found out later that that the information you got wasn't as open or honest or upfront as it could have or should have been from the beginning.
That's right.
That even if you're not the one giving the information, you're the one getting the information, but still involved in that decision. That's a tough one as well.
You betcha.
I think another one is, just think about, the are you open to the customs of other cultures? I mean, if we're thinking about, multicultural workplace or a diverse workforce,
There you go.
Do you try to assimilate when you're in the presence of other cultures? Do you try to be respectful? I mean, you're not, necessarily trying to, you can't replicate necessarily, but what can you do to be respectful and kind of assimilate the culture of what's going on?
That's right.
And,
And Dave, I'd like to add to that is
yeah,
that not just whether a person's from another ethnic group, but if you have men and women in the room, that's being sensitive to that. Do you have older people, younger people? These are things that we need to be aware of in our ability to socially interact with our team.
correct. So when you're looking at culture, especially for this question, you're absolutely right. You need to look at culture in a lot of different contexts. Whether it's generational culture, like you said, whether it's ethnic culture, whether it is, the cultures of different, like I said, just different work teams, maybe engineers, how they deal versus maybe sales and marketing, or admin, back in support. So, I mean, what is the culture, especially if things are siloed up, what are, different work teams and work divisions and different functional units maybe have a different culture of how they do things and how jobs gets done in their part of the organization.
Good point.
Just a thought.
Great point.
So what else we got?
Well, how about this? When a team member is not performing up to par, how do you handle the situation? Okay. Do you make them the bad guy, right? Or do you approach them in a way that, hey, they're capable of doing more, and that you need to explore what are some of the obstacles that are preventing them from being the best that they can be. So again, being aware of this person's feelings, being aware of this person's intentions. I mean, most people that come to work, they want to do the best they can. However, if a person's not performing up to par, we need to find out a little bit more about why that's happening. Is it there's something going on at home? Or is it maybe he's not getting cooperation at work, or she's not getting cooperation at work from her peers? So that's, again, another great place to apply some of the social awareness skill set that can help you be a better leader and your team be better performers.
Because one of the biggest things as leaders is your job is to remove obstacles that are in front of your team for them getting the job done. And you look at self-reflective, okay, did I give them everything they need? Did I give them the tools, the resources, the training, the mentoring, whatever? Did I give them what they needed to be able to do the job? And look at it as okay, well, ultimately, I'm the one in charge. It's my fault. Great book, total squirrel moment, but great book from Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership. I would say I would highly recommend that. That goes to this point, that it's still the leader's overall responsibility. And they can't, share the credit and take blame. You know what I mean? It's one of those, you take that ownership, but if it's yours to own, it's yours to fix. And so, that's the great part about it. So highly recommend that book. That's an awesome book. But yes,
what was the name of that book again, Dave? Again, that book?
Extreme Ownership.
Okay.
It's called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. It was a former Navy SEAL.
Okay.
And it talks about great book. Like I said, I would certainly recommend checking out his podcast, checking out his YouTube stuff and his books. But that Extreme Ownership is really a solid book that he had for a while back. But it strikes at the leaders on, same thing, owning the situation, and what could I have done to prevent this in the future? What could I have done to make this better at the time?
Okay.
So
you got another question.
All right. So I think the last one we have here, a question that I would throw out to everybody to kind of ponder upon when you're looking at social awareness, is how would achieving a higher level of empathy affect your decision-making ability? If I could really, really work on my empathy, and I could really have a strong sense of empathy and empathize with the people that I work with, subordinates, managers, vendors, co-workers, and I could really kind of put myself in their shoes and try to see it from their perspective. How much better would our workplace be if we just took just a little bit of time to see things from somebody else's perspective? It may be a little bit easier for us to talk to that person if we can step back and actually put ourselves in their shoes, look at it from their perspective. And maybe if we don't understand it, I'll throw out something really crazy. How about we talk to them and just ask, hey, I don't understand where you're coming from with this, but I would love to know.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, just can I say it? Like, this is crazy, right? This is crazy. This is like the, wait, and there's more, thing on the infomercial.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we get to understand people better. Maybe we get to learn people better. Maybe we don't have to fight all the time. Maybe it's one of those things we actually get to learn about the people that we work with, how they view the world, how they do things. And, sometimes we realize, wow, okay, these aren't we don't need to be at each other's throat in that odds all the time. Because now I can see, I might not necessarily agree with everything they do, but I can see it from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a tremendous difference when it comes to productive dialogue in an organization.
Absolutely. So just becoming more human, being able to let people be who they are, giving them the room to express who they are, and not playing the good guy, bad guy, but rather, hey, we're all on this team together. No one's perfect.
No.
But at the same time, we're all capable of being better when we work together. So I think that's the key. That's where we're going with this.
Yes.
You build your team through this social awareness by being able to be a human being and to really be aware of other people and look for and encourage the best to come from them.
Yes.
And at the same time, being the best that you can be when it comes to just using this empathy and this emotional intelligence that we all have.
Yes. So remember, social awareness is all about reading the room. It's all about empathy. It's all about reading kind of the temperature of the room and the vibe of the room and the environment to be able to make better decisions, to be more productive and more collaborative. And really, social awareness is just the cornerstone of our last point, which is social regulation. And I'll just throw out there that those that demonstrate superior social regulation, these are the folks that are very persuasive. They easily build rapport. They're adept at building these strategic alliances. So there's a lot of organizational and team benefits to having a high level of social regulation. But you have to have that awareness first.
And that's social regulation. That's what we'll talk about in our next podcast.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts for our listeners today on social awareness?
I just think that one thing we want to all keep in mind is that it's something we all have, something we can all get better. And that is being able to read that room, as you said, Dave, and being able to just be empathetic with those we work for or that work for us.
Yep. Be kind, have some empathy, and God forbid, look at it from somebody else's perspective every once in a while, and you'd be amazed at the results. So that's all we have for this episode of Business Smarts Radio. And we will see you all next time when we talk about social regulation. Take care.